Good morning. It is the day before Thanksgiving break. I haven't, the end of Thanksgiving break, and I have not touched any work all week, which I've been really proud of. So it's been a good week, but I do want to make sure that I'm planning out our imaginative narrative unit really well because I have a lot of big ideas and a lot of places that I'm pulling from. And so I figured while I'm planning it, I'll kind of record little clips and put it together to share in case it's helpful for you guys. So before Thanksgiving break, I know I was sharing that we were analyzing a lot of mentor texts, right? We were looking at characters and how authors develop a character and how we can, as readers, we can learn about a character. We also looked at authors' craft, things like dialogue tags, just different figurative language and how authors use even like the typeface of a book and looking at the way that they're printing the letters or the shapes of the letters or how illustrators incorporate the words to enhance the story. So we looked at a lot of that before Thanksgiving break, and now we're jumping into, and we did a couple character stretches too of their own, like to practice developing characters that they weren't committed to writing about, but just to practice, adding in words, thoughts, and actions about certain character traits. So that was all before Thanksgiving break, and now we're going to move into being a little more structured and getting to an end product of their first imaginative narrative. So what I'm going to do first is I've got my sticky notes and my poster paper. It's really just a piece of construction paper. And I'm going to just word vomit all of the things that I can think of that I want to make sure they're including, or resources that I remember I want to look back and pull from. So I know like the Thinker Builder has some really great stuff on character development. I've got our own TE for our writing curriculum. I've got stuff from Jen Jones about author's craft. I've got old worksheets that I had saved from Step Up to Writing that we used in my old district. And I've got Jen Serravallo's book, and then I've got some other resources that some of my team teachers found. So I'm just pulling a lot of stuff together. And like I said, I just need to make sure I get it organized so that I'm not overlapping things or things aren't disjointed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few minutes and just brain dump everything that I can think of that I want to cover in the next couple of weeks here and to have them do, and that I think will be helpful for the students as they start to develop their story, plan and draft their story, and go through and finalize it. So here we go. Okay, so now I've got this big mess of Post-its that was literally just ideas, and some of them are probably the same or very similar. So what I'm going to do now is take them apart and group them by things that would kind of go together, so that way I can start to piece together the flow of the unit. So that's kind of my next step here, start to look for patterns and how I want this to go in order. And actually I'm going to go grab another piece of construction paper so that I can move them from this original brain dump one into like a more organized way on another one. Okay, coffee is refilled, Twilight is napping, so I'm going to hop in and go ahead and start organizing all of these. I think I'll do that after. I'm going to double check the standards cheat sheet for 3rd grade just to make sure that everything I'm covering in here is kind of course, like you're not going to really go deep into every single standard in each unit, but I do want to make sure that I'm incorporating all of our writing standards for narrative writing. So I think I've got them all pretty well covered, but I'll just double check that. First though, I'm going to do what I said about pulling these into little groups that make sense. So let's go. Okay, so first I took them all and kind of categorized them on the other poster board or construction paper and started to look for like the ways that I could group them. And once I did that, I saw that there were kind of 8 main areas that I wanted to focus on. So I separated this one into those areas. You can kind of see here that I've kind of got just general introductory stuff. So introducing things like the rubric, the different options for formatting their published piece. So that way they can have that in mind as they're thinking, are they going to turn this imaginative narrative into a podcast recording? Are they going to turn it into a picture book or just a typed, like more chapter book style story? So looking at those kind of things up front. I also have an idea for a little pocket folder that they can use just for this specific writing project. So I'll share more about that later, but I put that all in the introductory thing. Then I've got a little bit more of like a plan, more specific to narratives. So choosing a point of view, then digging into reviewing our thinking maps. And we've done all this with personal narratives. So now it's just kind of reviewing Jen Bengel's writing workshop lessons, all these things that we've already kind of done for personal narratives in order to plan our imaginative narratives. So that's more of a review towards narratives. Then I also, as I started looking for the main areas that I wanted to cover, which were like their main character development. So choosing their main character. Again, the Thinker Builder has really, really great ideas for developing characters in writing. So this was all kind of about developing their main character. Then I also looked at supporting characters and their setting and how might have to do a little bit more in here, but how I want them to think about their supporting characters and the setting and how that relates to their overall story. Also looking at plot, reviewing theme, choosing a theme, reviewing like plot mountain or plot roller coaster, choosing a main problem and solution for their story, and just reviewing that general structure of a clear beginning, middle, and end. So that's kind of all there. And then this one, these are kind of things that we've already gone over a lot, and that a good group of my students has a handle on. So things like strong leads when they're writing, or stronger endings, elaborating or adding vivid details, like we've been calling them spicy words. So these are things that I don't necessarily want to do whole class lessons. Like these will be, even though some of the students already are pretty strong on some of these things, a lot of this is very new to really go into developing a character, really go into adding dialogue, figurative language. Like that's a lot of new stuff that I am going to do whole class. Hello, Luna. But these ones are things that I'll pull either small groups or individual writing conferences to go over things like I said, like elaborating, or if they need to reorder their events. I know I have students that are working on run-on sentences. So this is all more of like the specific things that I'll work on with small groups or individual writing conferences. And then the last one over here is all about revising and editing. So that's kind of where I put my Jen Jones grammar cheat sheet, things that we'll do with mentor sentences, looking back at past mentor sentences and current mentor sentences, pulling out picture books and looking at those to be models for sentence structure, going in and revising and editing with partners, with self, with me. So that's kind of all of the final piece before they publish. So that's kind of the general flow for imaginative narrative unit. Now I get to actually plan it. Okay, so before I go into the specifics of how I want to pace out these lessons and where I want to spend the most time, and knowing that we have 3 weeks between now and winter break, and of course that last week's always a little wishy-washy, so really 2 solid weeks of instruction and time to work on this imaginative narrative. I've shared this before, but it's from Core Galore and More, and I highly, highly recommend these. I can't recommend them enough. She's got reading and writing ones for K5, and it's got all of the standards on one page, which is just such an awesome reference. So just kind of going back to, if looking at the writing ones, there's a specific section. So is it, let's see, 3.3, W3.3, or if you're in first grade, it would be 1.3, or fifth grade, 5.3. So if your school uses Common Core, it's all kind of that same strand. So it's in writing, and it's the third section. So 0.3, whatever grade level you're in. So mine is writing 3.3, which is writing narratives to develop real or imagined experiences or events using effective technique, descriptive details, and clear event sequences, which all of this is leading towards. And then the main focus areas that are listed on here, kind of the big idea ones, are introducing a narrator and or characters, organizing sequence of events that unfolds naturally. So I've got that on there with point of view, planning the plot, going through plot mountain or plot roller coaster, whichever I want to go with this, choosing a problem and solution. So that all kind of tackles that, and making sure that the sequence of events and the voice are, solidly organized. Using dialogue, descriptions of actions, thoughts, and feelings. This is something we have been working on a lot. If you were following along before Thanksgiving break, we did a lot of work with analyzing character traits and then starting to brainstorm character traits based on words, thoughts, and actions. So now we're going to really apply that to their stories and making sure that they're consistent throughout, and every decision that their character makes, everything that their character says or thinks, all goes with their focus character traits, based on whatever their theme is for their story and their problem and solution. So kind of that's a big ask for third grade, and I do understand that. I know I'll have to support that quite a bit, and keep my 5th grade and 6th grade teacher brain, at 3rd grade level a little bit, but they are capable of it. Their personal narratives were really good, and the things they've been analyzing are really good. I just need to remember that I have to scaffold that pretty well. Using temporal words and phrases to signal event order. So I did put one thing in there. I think I put it with in my small group section, transitions to show time and place. And Step Up to Writing had a really helpful thing. This is where my hoarding comes in handy sometimes, right? As long as you keep it organized and you can find it. These were from a Step Up to Writing PD that I did forever ago. And if your school uses Step Up to Writing, you are super lucky, because it's so well applicable to any other curriculum. Like, it's not its own thing necessarily. It is its own thing, and it is really strong writing structure. Side tangent, but it ties in really nicely, and you can use it alongside whatever science, social studies, language arts curriculum, anything like that. It's made to align really well with you plugging it into different things, just making their writing stronger. Anyways, side note. So I did say that I have the packets from a couple of the things that were in it, and one of them was a checklist for narrative writing. So if you use Step Up to Writing and you have access to this drafting and narrative tips is very helpful. But this is the one I was going to focus on, was using narrative transitions to show changes in time or place. So things like many years later or right after that, showing a change in place, in the distance, or at school. And then transitions often start paragraphs, but not every paragraph needs one. That's important for them to remember too, because they will overuse them also. And I do point that out in books when we're reading them, that not every page or not every single paragraph in a picture book has a signal transition. You also need to teach them real life applicability, if that's the right word. And that's not real writing, right? It's not every single paragraph is then, next, finally, we have to teach them how to tell a story in a real format, and looking at real stories is the best way to do that. So we do address those, and I do expect them to use them in their writing, but I don't expect every paragraph to be starting with a first, then, next, last, because then it's very prescriptive writing, and it's not, their stories all kind of sound similar, and it's not, true writing development, true author's craft. There's so many more ways we can effectively develop an imaginative narrative. So side note on transitions and things like that. Same with dialogue, just trying to stay away from prescripted writing and very formulaic writing, if that's a more word that makes sense. But just really trying to get their own true stories and their own true voice out in their narratives. And it makes it so much more fun to read, so much more fun for them to write. Okay, so now I went through all of the Post-its and kind of mapped them out onto my little 3-week game plan. Again, being mindful that last week is the week before winter break, but also kind of backwards planning and knowing that on that Friday, I want to have our publishing party where everybody can share their stories. We can't have food in the classroom, so I can't do what I normally do with like a hot cocoa and popcorn party or whatever inside the classroom, or cookie party, whatever. And I don't know if the weather will be permitting for that. We're in Southern California, so probably get lucky, hopefully, and we can do some sort of treat and share our stories thing outside. But if not, I'll have bring in like a cozy blankie or something, and put on a fireplace on the screen, and we can share our stories that way by the fire. So anyways, that's what I want to do on the last day before winter break, which means we need to have our stories done. So I went through and paced everything out, as far as my week 1 goals, going into introducing the project to them, going over the rubric, and then working through our character development lessons. On here, I noted each of the things. So I know this is super messy, and I can type this out and see, like I said, some of this stuff is coming from our curriculum, so it's copyrighted, or from Jen Serravallo, or different other things. And I'll share where each of these things is coming from too, but just kind of more wanted to give you an overview of how I pull from a bunch of different resources in order to plan a cohesive unit that matches what my students' needs. So like I said, some of them are really struggling with pacing out their like the plot line and not jumping around so much. And then I also had an idea before break to make these little folders for them, because one other problem that a lot of my students have is they get really attached to one specific character or one specific thing, and they feel like as soon as they write it down, it's permanent. And so we're talking a lot about the writing process and how things constantly change. Our stories are ever evolving. We're never, even if we're done with this one, we can always go back and rewrite it later, or write another story if we didn't really like that character or that plot line. So it is very hard for them to like understand that it's not their one story forever. So I was hoping this would kind of help with that, if we have little cards for our characters. So I'm going to have them do our circle maps for our character development, and then little tree maps on the back of different words, thoughts, and actions. Like we've been working with that format. Again, I think if it's on a card and they feel like they can change it in and out, and if they want to change their main character, you know, some of their personality traits or things that they say and stuff, they can do that a little easier. So that's how I'm hoping that will work. And I did the same thing with a setting one too, so they can add to descriptions of the settings or how the setting changes throughout their story. This kind of will go with our flow map for beginning, middle, and end. I also, this is where I did Jen Serravallo's for the plot mountain. And just kind of pulling in, again, it's a matter of looking at all the resources that I have, mapping out the way that I want it to flow, making notes of where I found each thing. So whether it's the Thinker Builder or Jen Serravallo or Jen Jones or whoever I've learned from, whatever resources I have for it, making a note so I know what to pull from. And now when I go into my actual day-to-day lesson plans, I know what copies I need to make or what resource I need to have handy so that I can do that mini lesson and make sure that they're getting, you know, what the resource that I found that seems to be the best for that, or that I think will be most helpful for that. Today, next on my agenda, I'm starting to get overwhelmed, but that's okay, is to finish putting together these for them. I already have all the pieces cut. I did that before break, thank goodness. So now just kind of getting them grouped together so that they're ready to glue really easily, and not take a lot of our time tomorrow. And then I also am going to cut out, so one of the things that I will share a link to is the Thinker Builder's character development page. He's got a lot of great ideas for helping students really develop like a backstory for characters. There's an activity we'll do called Lots of Lists, where they really just make lists of 3 of your character's favorite hobbies, 3 things in their bedroom, 3 things that they do after school, 3, like it's got tons of these different ideas. And so you just set a timer and try to list as much as you can about your character, knowing that you're not going to use all of that in your story, but that as you're writing your story, you can pull from those things to help, you know, add details to your story or think about what your character might be saying, thinking, or doing based on what you've developed about your character. So, and then the other activity for thinking of a character, because again, that's one of the hardest things for my students to do, is to come up with a character that they without feeling like they're so attached to that character. And it's just that's been really hard for a lot of them, is like that starting point. And they've shared that in our writing workshop, like when we do our little wrap-ups at the end of writing workshop, a lot of them said once they get going, they feel pretty fluent, but that they just get stuck on that getting started. So one strategy that I really like from the Thinker Builder is cutting out different pictures from magazines. So I pulled in like old magazines, our little community activity guide, advertisements, and I'm just going to cut out like different people or even like animals or people with animals or whatever, and have a whole array of characters to choose from, and then that will be their starting point for their main character. They'll choose one of these to be their main character, then they'll give them a name, they'll give them start to build their backstory with lots of lists and family tree and all those different types of activities. And then from there we'll go into the theme, you know, what do they want the main idea and the theme of their story to be. So what is the theme? What's the lesson that they want to be taught throughout their story? And then what's the main idea, the problem and solution that is going to reveal that theme for the reader. And then from there we'll go into our whole plot development, going into adding back you know, which setting they want to be, what's going to be the most relevant setting to set this story in. Is the character going to be at school, at home, you know, up at camp or something, on vacation, whatever it may be. So thinking of all of those pieces and going through this whole 2 weeks of developing it. So I'll keep you guys posted as we go, but I just wanted to give you a peek. I know this was a very long peek. Hopefully it was super helpful into how I dump out all these ideas, organize them in a way that makes sense, and look at what resources I have that I can pull in to hopefully make this a successful unit for my students.